Oh, you're here. Good. I was hoping for company. You see, I've got stories, dark ones, chilling ones, the kind that keep you up at night. Mythical creatures, curses, horrors you can't escape. Shall we begin? Don't worry, I won't bite. Much.
This story takes place in a small town. There was a local doctor named John Carter. Everyone in town knew John, not just because he was a good doctor, but because he was the kind of guy who'd help you fix a leaky faucet or figure out why your goat was acting weird. He had a good heart and always lent a hand when someone needed it. A while back, John had even helped the police solve a murder case. Since then, folks started treating him like the town's unofficial detective. If something weird was going on, you could bet someone would knock on his clinic door to ask, "Hey doc, what do you think this means?" One day, John got a phone call at the clinic. It was from Mark Griffin, a well-known guy in town, rich and respected. Mark ran a big herbal farm, over 200 acres of land, growing all kinds of traditional medicinal plants. He had more than 10 workers under him and ran the place like clockwork. But on the phone that day, Mark sounded panicked. "John, one of my workers just hurt his hand real bad. Can you come over right away?" John didn't hesitate. That was just the kind of guy he was. He grabbed his medical bag, jumped in his car, and headed for Mark's farm, which was only a 10-minute drive away. When he got there, Mark was already waiting for him at the gate. "Quick, he's in the drying shed," Mark said, waving him along. The drying shed was a big wooden structure, kinda like a barn, designed to air dry freshly picked herbs. The whole thing was made of timber, with wide gaps between the beams to let the wind pass through. Thick plastic sheets were rigged up to roll down during rain and pulled back up when it was dry again. Inside the shed, John found the injured worker, a young man around 27 or 28. Mark introduced him as Jake Hill. According to Mark, a rack full of herbs had tipped over and crushed Jake's hand. It was bleeding pretty bad. John crouched down beside him, opened his bag, and got to work. The wound looked nasty, but it wasn't life-threatening. After cleaning it up and wrapping it carefully, John told Jake, "Come to the clinic in a week, so I can change the bandage, all right? Don't let it sit too long." Mark, being friendly with John, walked him back out to the gate, the two chatting casually on the way. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. A week later, John was sitting in his clinic, wondering why Jake hadn't shown up for his follow-up. Right as the thought crossed his mind, a truck pulled up out front. Behind the wheel was Susan Griffin, Mark's wife. Jake climbed out from the passenger side. John figured it made sense. Jake worked for the family, so of course Susan might drive him over. Susan smiled politely while John changed Jake's dressing. When it was done, she thanked him, and the two left. Everything still seemed normal, but trouble was already on the way. Another week passed. One afternoon, John got a call from Susan Griffin. "Hi, Dr. Carter. Things at the farm have been crazy busy lately. Could I trouble you to stop by the house to change Jake's bandage? It's hard for him to get away right now." John didn't mind one bit. "Sure thing," he said, grabbing his medical kit and heading out. But this time, the dressing wasn't changed in the drying shed. Susan invited him into the Griffin family's living room. When John walked in, he saw Susan and Jake sitting together on the couch. Earlier, as he'd pulled up, John had noticed Mark Griffin out in the fields with a bunch of workers. He seemed busy, shouting orders and inspecting plants. Inside, after a brief chat, John got to work, changing Jake's bandage. Jake thanked him, got up, and headed back out to work. John was just about to leave when Susan suddenly stopped him. "Dr. Carter," she said softly, almost hesitant, "there's something I'd like your help with. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." John raised an eyebrow. He didn't know Susan all that well. They weren't close, but they'd exchanged hellos enough times. He gave a polite nod. "Of course. What's going on?" Susan reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "It's a letter," she said. "Someone left it for me." John unfolded the note and read the words, written neatly by hand. "I know exactly what you and Jake have been doing in the drying shed. If you want to keep that perfect little life of yours from falling apart, I suggest you think twice before carrying on." John looked up, confused. "What's this about?" Susan rushed to explain. "Dr. Carter, I swear, there's nothing going on between me and Jake. He's just a worker. That's it. He's 27, I'm 37. What could possibly be happening? This is someone making things up. Maybe they're trying to blackmail us or cause trouble. But I'm telling you, there's nothing." John kept his expression neutral. "If I really had something to hide," Susan added, "I wouldn't come to you, would I?" John nodded slowly. "Why not go to the police?" Susan shook her head. "You know how this town is. Even if it's innocent, people will talk. They'll whisper behind my back. And Mark, well, you know how he gets. He's got a temper. He'd be furious." That, John understood. In a town like this, gossip spreads faster than wildfire. Even smoke could burn you. "All right," he said. "I'll help you look into it. But it won't be easy. Your place has a lot of workers." Susan nodded. "During harvest season, yeah, we've got a lot of temps. But full-time, there are only 3. Just Jake, Bill, he's in his 50s, Mark's right-hand man, and our housekeeper, Auntie Zoe. Bill's been with us for over 10 years, helps with just about everything. Zoe cooks, cleans, and does some light work on the farm." John considered it for a second, then said, "Okay. It's evening already. Why don't I stay for dinner? If I can meet them all together, I might pick up on something." Susan agreed immediately. "They always eat with us, just the 5 of us. The seasonal workers have their own housing." She called Zoe right away to come back and prep dinner. While they waited, John went upstairs to say hi to Mike, the Griffin's 14-year-old son. He knocked on the boy's bedroom door. "Hey, Uncle John," Mike beamed when he saw him. John chuckled. "Heard you got some kind of school award." Mike grinned proudly and pointed up. Floating near the ceiling were colorful helium balloons. School rewards for good behavior. John had seen them around town, given out by teachers as little prizes. "What did you do to earn those?" he asked. "My essay got picked for reading in front of the whole class," Mike said proudly. John smiled. "Nice. Mind if I read it?" "Sure." Mike grabbed his notebook and handed it over. John flipped through the essay. The kid could write, that was clear. Neat handwriting, solid structure, even a few literary references. But John was paying more attention to the handwriting. The shapes of the letters, the strokes, the rhythm. His mind was already comparing it to the anonymous note. The letter had been carefully written, a bit stiff, almost like someone was trying to mask their natural style, but still clean and confident, like someone who had practice. John closed the notebook and gave Mike a thumb up. You've got talent, kiddo." Just then, Mark's booming voice echoed from downstairs. "John, you still up there? Come down and have a drink." John smiled and headed down. The dining table was already set. Mark uncorked a bottle of wine, all smiles, insisting John have a glass. Moments later, the 3 full-time workers arrived: Jake, Bill, and Auntie Zoe. Mike came downstairs too, and sat next to his mom. You could tell he was close with her. As usual, Mark did most of the talking at dinner. He was loud, cheerful, the kind of host who liked to steer the conversation. That made things easier for John. He could sit back, ask a few casual questions, and observe. From the conversation, John learned Jake had been at the farm 3 years. Before that, he worked on a tea plantation. He liked to play pool in town when he had free time. Bill had 2 missing fingers, an old injury from working at a slaughterhouse. He wasn't very educated, but he was sharp and capable, practically running the farm whenever Mark wasn't around. Zoe had barely gone to school, but she was a fantastic cook and ran the household smoothly. Her daughter was in university, a fact she brought up proudly. By the time dinner ended, John had mentally ruled out both Bill and Zoe. Neither had the writing skills or the motive to send a note like that. That left one suspect: Mike. The kid had the handwriting, and he watched his mom closely. But why would he write a letter like that? That was still a mystery. Just as John was mulling it over, Mark stood up. "Hey," he said, "I just remembered. One of the main bulbs in the drying shed is busted. I'm gonna go fix it before it gets too dark." He grabbed Jake and Bill and headed out with a flashlight. "Don't go anywhere, John. Be right back." John stayed behind. Seeing a quiet moment, he pulled Susan aside and shared his suspicions. She nodded slowly. But before they could talk more, a scream shattered the night. "Somebody help! He's dead! He's been killed!" It was Jake. He was yelling at the top of his lungs. John bolted for the drying shed. Inside, Mark Griffin was lying on the floor, motionless. Blood was pouring from his throat. John rushed to check, but it was too late. Mark was dead, his throat cleanly slashed. Jake and Bill stood frozen, horrified. Neither had a weapon in hand. And the killer? Gone, like a ghost. John called the police right away. Within minutes, Detective Lee Jackson and his team arrived, quickly sealing off the scene. Lee was a veteran, sharp, calm, and no nonsense. John walked him through everything that had happened that night, from dinner to the scream. Then, Lee pulled Jake and Bill aside, questioning them one by one. Their stories matched almost perfectly. Mark had wanted to replace a busted bulb in the drying shed. The 3 of them headed over with flashlights. Bill, with his injured hand, couldn't handle fine work, so he fetched the ladder and held it steady, while Mark climbed up and changed the bulb. Once done, Mark climbed back down and asked Jake, who had been waiting outside, to flip the switch and test the light. As Jake walked over to the breaker, Bill was folding the ladder back up. That's when they heard it. A loud thud. Mark had suddenly collapsed. Jake flipped on the lights, and the sight made his stomach churn. Mark was on the ground, his throat slashed wide open, blood pulsing from the wound. Neither Bill nor Jake had seen anyone else in the shed. Neither had any blood on them, and there was no murder weapon in sight. The drying shed, made entirely of wood, had plenty of gaps. Between the planks, and the roof beams, along the walls. The police searched everywhere, combed through the space inch by inch. They even checked Jake and Bill thoroughly. Nothing. No knife, no razor, no trace of how Mark had been killed. The weapon had vanished. Back at the house, the Griffin family was shattered. Susan was sobbing uncontrollably. Auntie Zoe, Mike, and several workers gathered around, trying to console her. Detective Lee pulled Susan aside. "I heard from Dr. Carter about a letter," he said. Susan sniffled, wiping her face. "Yes, I didn't want to make a scene earlier, but Mike, our son, he admitted he wrote it." Lee frowned slightly. "He did?" Susan nodded. "He misunderstood. He thought I was too friendly with Jake. I guess he got jealous. But there's nothing going on." I swear Lee was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'd like to talk to him." "Alone." Susan hesitated, then called Mike over and left the two of them in his room. A minute later, John Carter quietly entered as well. He and Lee exchanged a look, then both glanced upward. The balloons. They were still floating on the ceiling. Mike's school reward. Lee pointed. "These come in packs of 10, right?" John nodded. "Always." They pulled the balloons down and counted. 9. "Mike," Lee said gently, "anyone else been in your room today? Aside from your mom and us?" Mike blinked. Yeah. Jake came by after school. We played chess for a bit." John and Lee looked at each other. "Then one of the balloons is missing," John said quietly. "Gone," Lee murmured. "Floated away." Lee turned on his heel and rushed back to the drying shed. The ceiling was high, the roof full of wide wooden beams with open gaps. A small balloon could easily float up and slip out between them, especially one carrying something light but deadly. He ordered an immediate search of the surrounding area. Within the hour, they found it. In a cornfield not far from the shed, stuck among the stalks, was a green balloon. Tied to the string was a razor blade, the kind used for shaving. Sharp, clean, lethal. Jake was gone. Somewhere during the chaos, he had slipped away. A full manhunt was launched. Back at the house, Lee went back to Mike's room to talk one more time. He didn't tell Mike that Jake was now a suspect. Instead, he focused on the letter. "Why'd you write it?" he asked gently. Mike looked ashamed. "I guess I got jealous. Mom kept talking to Jake, being extra nice to him, always asking how he was doing. She'd disappear for a while and come back smiling. Sometimes I couldn't even find her. One day, I saw them laughing together in the living room, and I snapped." Lee listened patiently. "But," Mike added, "I don't hate Jake or anything. He's nice to me. He even plays chess with me after work. He's like a big brother." Lee nodded slowly. He didn't say it out loud, but the picture was clear. Susan and Jake weren't just friendly. They were involved, and that gave Jake motive, a powerful one. Mark stood between Jake and the life he wanted. Stability, money, Susan. And now, Mark was gone. The next day, Jake's body was found near a set of railway tracks. He'd tried to escape by hopping a freight train in the middle of the night. Investigators believe he slipped while climbing and fell into the rocks below. He likely didn't die right away, but with no one around, he bled out before morning. The case was closed. The conclusion was grim but logical. Jake had sabotaged the bulb, hidden in the shed, and waited in the dark. When the moment was right, he struck, using the razor blade balloon as his weapon. Then, as the lights came on, he pretended to be shocked and innocent. Whether Susan had any part in the plan, no one could say. With Jake dead, there was no one left to ask. Months later, Susan sold the herbal farm and left town quietly, taking her son Mike with her. She never came back.